Hey guys, thanks a lot for clicking on this video. I'm finally tearing into this LT1. I'm going to change the cam, the rocker arms, the valve springs, the rocker studs, and I'm also going to go with some thinner head gaskets to bump the compression up. Now, I've read lots of stories online of people swapping cams in an LT1 and then immediately spinning rod bearings right afterwards. Some people claim that that's because they didn't do a clean job when they did the cam swap and they introduced some foreign matter into the engine that got into the bearings. Other people say the problem is that the LT1 and small block Chevys of that era in general have very wide tolerances on bearing clearances. They can be pretty loose, like all the way 3/1000ths or more, all the way down to very tight. Like I believe the number one main can go all the way down to 7/10,000ths, like less than 1/1000th of an inch oil clearance. And so if you were unlucky enough to get one that had really tight clearances, which is okay per the book, it might be prone to spinning rod bearings at higher RPM. Other people say it's because the stock rod bolts are kind of weak and they stretch. And when they stretch, the cap lets go of the bearing assumes crankshaft RPM, and everything becomes unhappy. So I'm going to try to eliminate all these potential reasons why my engine might be prone to spin a rod bearing. I'm going to go with fresh, good quality bearings and set them up with really good clearances. I'm going to shoot for like 2 to 2.5 of an inch oil clearance, and I'm also going to use ARP rod bolts, and which means when I get those pressed in, I have to have the rods resized. So I'll have nice round rod bores, good bearings, good clearances, and good bolts. So my engine should have everything going for it as far as the stock bottom end can take. Now, this is going to be a long video, and you don't have to suffer through the whole thing. I put timestamps in the description, so you can just click away to whatever part you want to see. Thanks a lot for watching. Alright guys, rods and pistons are out, and I'm on my way to the machine shop to get the ARP bolts pressed in and the big ends resized. Alright guys, here are the parts I'm going to install on these heads. The spring package is from Lloyd Elliott, and this is what he uses on his LE2 head porting. And it's the springs, locators, retainers, seals, and locks. Now initially I was looking at a set of pack beehive springs, but I want to send these heads into Lloyd eventually to get ported, and at that time I would end up paying for these parts. So buy once, cry once. I'll just go ahead and buy them now, and I won't end up buying valve springs twice. I also have some trick flow guide plates and 7/16 studs, and some Scorpion 1.6 full roller rockers with poly locks. Alright, valve springs are all installed. Gotta tell you, Lloyd looks out for you. There was 2 extra keepers and 2 extra seals in the kit. Now time for the studs and guide plates. I'm just gonna snug them on for now and not really torque them. That way if I have to manipulate the guide plates a little bit once the push rods are in, I can still do that. Up. Now you want to lube these threads, I believe, but I'm not torquing them just yet, so I'll wait to do that. Alright, now the heads just get set aside and wait to go on the engine. All right guys, on this 190,000 mile engine, the bores are in absolutely perfect shape. There is zero discernible ridge, which means there is zero taper in the cylinders. So I have some new plasma moly rings that I'll be installing, and I need them to seat, so I'm going to be trying to break the glaze with this 320 grit Flex Hone and Walmart's cheapest 10W30 motor oil. That looks pretty good just after 10 strokes. I think I'll spend a little more time at the bottom. I think that'll do it. I think I'll do 20 strokes. I think I'll do 10 and then wipe it out, re-lube it, and do 10 more. I want to keep it real clean and flushed out so I'm not grinding chips back in or letting the hone load up with metal. Alright guys, it's cam bearing time. So I've got my Cleveite / Moly set of cam bearings, and the box flap here tells you which part numbers go in which positions. So I've got them numbered here so I can make sure I put the right one in the right spot. Also, according to the How to Rebuild Your LT1 book, you want the oil hole to be at about the 2 o'clock position. Apparently the LT1 blocks have a oil groove that goes all the way around the cam bearing, so it doesn't really matter where the oil hole goes, but for whatever reason the super smart people decided that 2 o'clock was good. Except for the front one. It has 2 oil holes, so it goes at 2 and 10. And I've got these marked with this line here so that when the line is at the bottom, then we have 2 and 10. Or in this case, when the line is at the bottom, we have 2 o'clock. The line is at the bottom because I'm going to put the cam bearings in with the engine upside down. So when I have the line at the top, I'll make sure that'll tell me that the oil hole is in the right position. So you can see you got the rear cam bearing out. Apparently I wasn't recording while that happened. And then you can see the oil groove here. So that's why the oil hole position is not critical, because it has that groove that goes all the way around. But you do have to get the fore and aft depth of the bearing just right so that the hole lines up with the groove. This is my Speedway Motors cam bearing tool. Here's the end of it. And 1 for 1, it's working great so far. Alright, got my number 5 bearing with the line pointing up. Okay, the tool's just about flush in there. So the best video I've seen for installing LT1 cam bearings is from Carl Elwine. I'll put a link in the description, but he's got a little trick where you take a small Allen wrench and you put it through the oil hole and you can feel whether or not it's lined up with the groove. So this does not go through the hole. It just goes through the hole in the bearing and then it's solid against the block still. So I'm going to tap this a little further. All right, so I got a teeny tinier Allen wrench. I believe I'm lined up with the oil hole. However, it's not back quite far enough. It would not be against the cam plug. I think it can go back a little further. The question is whether that light will stay there. Okay, that is almost exactly to where the cam plug should stop. All right, so feeling around with the Allen wrench, I think I can tell that the bearing is on the aft side. It's lined up with the groove. It's just exactly lined up on the back side, whereas towards the front it has a little more room. So I'd say the oil hole is to the back of the groove, but still totally, I'd say it's at the rear limit of being perfect. All right, now I got my number 4 bearing. I've got the line up and I've got the oil hole down here so that when the engine's right side up, that will be 2 o'clock when viewed from the front. All right, the edge of the bearing has just disappeared in the block web on that side. All right. Allen wrench trick says I'm in the groove. Rolled up a teeny little shaving on that one. I think I got it, but I'm going to wipe this thing down. All right, I got my number 3 bearing. Okay. All right, oil hole is lined up with oil groove. Can clearly see the oil hole is lined up with the groove. Actually, I can see that on all 3 of the middle ones. All right, so the front cam bearing, you have to put the tool in from the back to keep it aligned. So obviously it cannot be on an engine stand to do that. Beautiful. I've got the thing on the floor. Is a good time to get these last 2 freeze plugs and also the cam plug. It's in. Alright guys, so I've just slipped my stock cam back in here for a minute and it turns completely freely. So good alignment, good install on the cam bearings. Alright guys, got my Summit main bearing kit here. These were super cheap. They're like $20 for the whole set. Hopefully they're going to work fine. One and a half thou. That one's between 1.5 and 2. That one kind of tapers. It goes from 1 to 2. 1.5. That one has 3. Alright, rods are back from the machine shop. Nice looking ARP bolts installed. Reconditioned bores. They look great. Alright guys, so I Plastigauged the main bearings and I was getting about 1.5 thou on most of the journals. One of them was as small as 1 thou, and that's just not gonna quite be enough. So I measured the main journals on the crank and they're all within spec just fine. So I went ahead and ordered another set of bearings. These are some Cleveite HX bearings, X for 1 thou extra oil clearance. They were a good bit more money than those Summit bearings, and I also next day air shipped them because that's what you do when you're impatient. So hopefully these ones work out. Okay, that one's right in the middle between 2 and 3. That one was also between 2 and 3. That one is right on almost 3. I'd say it's like 2.8 or 2.9. That one is 3. And that one is 3. It appears the best cleaner for the Plastigauge residue is the fingernail. Alright guys, here's the story to this point. So I started by installing all of the standard set of main bearings that I had, just a kind of rebuilder set from Summit, standard diameter, and I Plastigauged them all. And they came out between like 1 and 1.5 thousandths, which is okay per the book, but it's on the tighter side. I'm personally looking for more like 2.5 thousandths. And the whole point of doing this, I mean, the engine didn't have any problems, so the whole point of doing this is to make it as unlikely to spin a bearing as possible now that I'm going to be turning it a little faster as I go with a little bit bigger cam and that kind of thing. So to put it back together with the clearances that weren't really what I wanted would be kind of shooting myself in the foot. So I went ahead and ordered these Clevite HX bearings. So X is 1/1000th extra oil clearance, so they're 1/1000th oversized for where the crank journals sit. And so I Plastigauged them, and they came out at like 2.5 and 3 thousandths. So it'd be better if they were 2.5 all the way across, but 2.5 and 3, really that's pretty good. That's more in line with what I was looking for. So went ahead, put in all the assembly lube, laid the crank in, torqued them for real, moved on to the rods. So I found that trying to Plastigauge the rod bearings is actually kind of a trick, because these ARP rod bolts, which are great, they have a really nice aggressive knurling on the shank of the bolt, and the cap, as it gets pressed over that knurling, it kind of form-fits to each other. That knurling forms to the bore inside the cap there, so it becomes really solid and really tight. And so after you torque it on there, and you take the nuts back off, trying to get that cap back off of those rod bolts is really tough. Really, you kind of have to tap on it and wiggle it and all that stuff, and to do that without turning the crankshaft at all is just about pretty much impossible. And of course, turning the crankshaft will smear the Plastigauge. So it took me a few tries, but I finally got it to where I was pretty confident in the measurement, and the measurement came out at 1.5 thousandth on both the 1 and 2 rod bearings. Again, that's a little tighter than I wanted. The whole point of this is to set it up to where it will not spin a rod bearing, and so I'm looking for 2.2 to like 2.5 thousandths on there. So I went ahead and of course ordered a set of Clevite HX rod bearings, get my extra thou clearance on there. And since I'm impatient, went ahead and next day shipped them too, because that's just, I need it now. So got my new oversized bearings, got them into these first 2 rods again, torqued them on there, and came up with exactly the same 1.5 thousandth per the Plastigauge. And that's clearly not right. So that means one of two things. Either it means Clevite is not very good at making bearings, or it means Chris is not very good at measuring with Plastigauge. And I'm going to go with that one. So I was able to borrow a snap gauge, a 2 1/8 inch snap gauge. And I was going to use that to compare the H bearing to the HX bearing to see if it really was the same bore diameter or if it was different and the Plastigauge was lying to me. So I measured it, and before I even swapped the bearings back out, I thought, well, I'll go ahead and make the crank too, because I had micrometers already. So I mic'd the rod journal and did the math, and it was 2.9 thousandths clearance when the Plastigauge had told me 1.5. So that pretty much demolished all of my confidence in the Plastigauge numbers at that point, because 1.5 and 2.9 are not the same thing. And so immediately I thought, oh crap, what about all the mains that just Plastigauged out at 2.5 to 3 thousandths? Are they really like 5 or 6 thousandths if the real clearance is coming out at twice what the Plastigauge says? Or are they right? Maybe it's because of my technique with rod caps. Maybe I'm just wrong on the rods, but the mains are okay. But either way, confidence is gone. So we broke down and ordered up a dial bore gauge and mic'd every journal on the crank. So I went through and mic'd them, and then I did what any full-grown, self-respecting man would do, and I asked my dad for help. And in my case, my dad made a living for many years overhauling Allison turbine engines for helicopters, including making his own specialty tools on a lathe and a mill. So if I have confidence in anybody in the world to have the proper feel on a micrometer, it's that guy. So I had him go through and mic and check all of my measurements on the crank, and so I have 100% confidence now on how the crank journals measure up. And so got the dial bore gauge in hand now. I've got it set up on the mic, and I went ahead into this number 5 main bearing here, and it comes up as 4.4 thousandths, which is a bit bigger than the 3 that I had measured on the Plastigauge. So that's where we're at now. I'm going to go through every main now. Now that I have 3 sets of main bearings and 2 sets of rod bearings and a whole collection of next day air shipping under my belt, I think between the mic, the dial bore gauge, and 5 different sets of bearings, we're going to be able to come up with some pretty right-on clearances. So that's the story as of right this moment. Main number 1 ended up with 2 X shells for 0.0023. Main number 2 ended up with 2 X shells for 0.0025. Main number 3 ended up with 1 standard and 1 X shell for 0.0023. Main number 4 ended up with 1 standard and 1 X shell for 0.0025. Main 5, the thrust bearing, ended up with 2 standard shells for 0.0025. All right, good thrust clearance. this is a Koi, it's just a stock replacement timing set. So with the spline drive Opti, there's not really any choices on a timing set. Because you have to have the splined hole in the middle. And this is pretty much the only one that does. So this dowel pin here, if you have a later LT1 with the pin drive Opti, then you need this pin to be longer. You probably need to replace it, or I've heard of some people pulling it out if there's enough pin in there, I don't know. I have the early one, so it has a spline little drive shaft that goes in here. It does not rely on that pin at all, so all that pin has to do is locate the timing gear. So I'm good to go with it how it is. I'm getting the hang of this dial bore gauge. First, you dial up your micrometer to the outside diameter of the crankshaft, then you measure the micrometer with the dial bore gauge, then you adjust the bezel to zero out the dial bore gauge at that measurement. Now you can reset the plunger on the dial indicator and measure the micrometer again to verify that it goes back to zero. Now you just sweep the tool through the rod bearing and it will display the difference between the size of the micrometer, which represents the crankshaft, and the inside diameter of the rod bearing. .26. This one's just over 2.5 thousandths. Now do it again and see if the measurement is repeatable. 2.6 again. Don't forget to write it down. Alright guys, got all my rod bearings measured. I measured them all first with the HX bearing, and they were all pretty big. And then I measured them all again with the standard bearing, and they're perfect. So the smallest one was a 0023, a couple 0024s, a 0025, and then 4 of them are 0026. So they're all right there at my target of 2.5 thousandths. Alright guys, number one at top dead center, my depth mic says the piston is 33 thousandths in the hole. So according to the book, the aluminum LT1 cylinder heads have 54 cc combustion chambers, the flat top pistons have 5 cc's worth of valve reliefs, the original gasket compresses to 51 thousandths, and I measured my deck clearance to be 33 thousandths. Using this Texas speed calculator, that all adds up to a compression ratio of 10.367 to 1, which falls right in line with the book value of 10.4 to 1. Now, if I take that 51 thousandths gasket and I use a Cometic MLS gasket that compresses to 27 thousandths, without changing anything else, that now gives me a compression ratio of 11.02 to 1. During the muscle car era, the hottest version of every engine that Chevrolet produced, the DZ302, the 365 horse 327s, the 375 horse 396s, 435 horse 427s, all of them. Every engine that I longed and pined over all through my childhood, they all had 11 to 1 compression. So to me, there's something a little bit extra cool about having legitimate 11 to 1 compression on my LT1. The rocker stud holes should all be blind holes on LT1 heads, but apparently some of them are very close to breaking through into the intake runners. So you want to take a close look and make sure that they don't break through, otherwise you'll want to use sealant on your rocker stud threads. I could see the lifter collapsing over the nose of the cam, so I'm going to need to get some oil pressure into the lifters. Exhaust is opening, so we adjust the intake. Okay, there's zero lash. Now I'm looking for, so that was exhaust opening. Now I'm going to be looking for intake closing, which is there. Okay, there's zero lash. So now I run that through a few revolutions and I should get a wear pattern on the valves. Alright, so that one you can see it favors more the exhaust side than the intake side. So I think that would indicate I could go a little shorter on the push rod. This one did not make a pattern all the way across. I think I'll try that one again. I don't know if it looks like the valve turned. Yeah, I'm going to clean that off and try that one again. So on this one, It's definitely close. I mean, it's in the middle. I mean, the rocker arm does touch the middle of the valve stem, but it's not evenly split across the middle. It spends more time towards the exhaust side than the intake side. So I think that would mean the rocker arm is a little long. And then on this one, it's just only touching on that side. So I might try tapping the guide plate to the back a little bit, because I notice on this one it seems like the rocker tip is totally even on the valve, and on this one it seems like it's off to the side just a little bit, like it's just in from this side and then it hangs over a bit on that side. So I might try to move it and even them out just a little bit. So it's just snug. So now this one looks centered and this one looks off. Okay, I think that looks centered a little better. Well, it improved a little bit. We're now got like halfway across the valve. Still pretty good pattern on that one. Still saying the push rod's slightly long. See if I can get a good pattern on both of them. Well, you can see I've got it to where the edge of the roller is just starting to show on the valve there. And it's still not making a nice pattern across. I mean, I can see a little bit of where it touched on the left side, but it's hitting a lot harder on the right side. I guess, maybe I'll try a different rocker arm. Alright guys, so you can see I'm kind of having a similar issue here. I'll get a pretty full contact on one, but not the other. One, but not the other. And this one, I mean, you can see it was already starting to get kind of light on this side, like I had shifted the guide plate as far as I could, and it still didn't quite get a good contact pattern there. And then on this one, I noticed you can really clearly see that rocker arm is offset to the left, while that rocker arm is offset to the right. So I think the issue is the slots on these trick flow non-adjustable guide plates just aren't spaced exactly right for these LT1 studs, unfortunately. Alright guys, after struggling a little bit last night, I gave up on these one-piece guide plates. Went ahead and ordered some two-piece adjustable ARP guide plates. I also ordered up my hardened push rods. I decided on 50 thousandths shorter than these. And then I also, while I was cranking on the starter, noticed that my Flexplate has a gigantic amount of run out. So I ordered up a new Flexplate too. All those parts should show up tomorrow. So it looks like about the only thing I'll be able to do tonight is try to get the water pump on. So let's work on that. got parts, push rods, guide plates, and a flex plate. Alright, so this unmarked box, these are supposed to be AFR. Oh, okay, yeah, they say it. I don't know if you can see that. They say AFR on the actual guide plates. There you can see them. AFR 6103, and they're marked left and right, so that's handy. Alright, so there's the one-piece trick flow, and there's the two-piece AFRs. And so I've got them spread as far apart as they'll go, and then I just finger tighted the studs down on them. I figure it's easier to tap the pieces together than it is to try to spread them back out. So I'll start with them spread out as far as they go, and I think they'll be easy to adjust from there with a punch. Alright, I'm just going to put a tiny little bit of tension on here just to where I just start to feel drag. Trick flow push rods. They say 4 guide plates in the ad, so I believe they are hardened. Trick flow 7/150 80. Alright, so obviously you can see we're not lined up yet. That's sitting a bit better. Well, that's no good. So the rocker arm is now hitting the hex flange on the stud. Yeah. Probably because those push rods are shorter, so the rocker arm had to sit down further. Now, it could be that I have that lifter collapsed, so we back this off so it's got clearance, and then I'm going to turn the engine over a few times. All pressure coming up. 15 psi. It is just bubbling out of all the lifters. There's no push rods in any of the other lifters, so it's not really going to make a lot of pressure in the lifter gallery. I never know if it's galley or gallery, but I don't really care. The place where the oil goes into the lifters, there's not really going to be any resistance to flow there because the lifters are all just wide open in the cups. So that's probably going to be about as good as I can do there. So what I need to do, so that's exhaust, so I'm going to go EOIC, so I'm going to wait till the intake lifter is going down, and that's when I'll adjust the exhaust valve. Alright, it's coming up. Going down, it's almost back down to the base circle. So this will be when this exhaust one is on its base circle for sure. Okay, so there's zero lash. Okay, it's not quite touching the stud. See if I can give it a quarter turn without mashing it onto there. It is not touching. It is very, very close. It's probably 50 thousandths but it is not touching. This engine is getting 1/4 turn of lifter preload, but that's actually more than it sounds like, because normally typical small block Chevy is going to have 3/8 24 studs, so 24 threads per inch, but these are 7/16 20 studs, so it's 20 threads per inch. So a 1/4 turn on this one is like 5/16 of a turn normally, so I'm totally good. All right, I'm gonna run that a few times to try to get a good pattern on the valve tip. All right, so it's looking a little better than it was last night. It's marking more than half of the valve tip, but still not evenly across it. So I'm going to kind of twist the rocker arm a little bit more so it centers further to the left on the valve tip, and maybe it'll put the pressure more evenly. I still have space in the guide plate there, so I can tap this one in a little further. Oh yeah, that moved. I'm going to go with a nice fresh mark on here. Go with a fresh rocker arm just for fun. Quarter turn. Got clearance. 7, 8, 9, 10. That's even worse. Okay, let's try more. So you can see it only really marked the right-hand half of the valve tip. So if I tap the guide plate this way, it should move the rocker arm like this, which should center its force, its pressure, further to the left side of the valve tip. At least that's how I think it works. We'll see what it does. Let's just go exaggerating. Didn't change at all. I wonder if the valve stem was bent, it would stick. So it can't be bent valve. And look how far offset that is. I mean, that's ridiculous. I don't get it. Let's try going the other way. Okay, so that's pretty much centered on the valve tip. 0, quarter turn. All right, if it'll focus. So now I can at least see some sort of a witness mark that goes all the way across. So that, as bad as that looks, that's the best I can get this one. And I'm going to move on to the other 15. All right, intake is closing, so that means exhaust is on the base circle. Now we're going to get a little bit of assembly lube. I mean, the pocket down there is flooded with oil, so I'm not going to worry about that so much. A little bit of lube in the push rod pocket. A little bit kind of smeared on the roller. Okay, that is 0 lash. 1 quarter turn. Oh, I think that guide plate might have walked when I torqued it. I'm gonna check this thing one more time now that I think it moved. I'm gonna spend all night on one rocker arm. The track will close for the winter, and I will still not even have the valve covers on. That is by far the best that has looked yet. Now, if I can just torque that without the guide plate moving, I will be ecstatic. Yeah, see, it's moving. Okay, so it shouldn't be able to close up the gap with this screwdriver in here. Okay, think we did it. Gonna run this whole battery dead on one rocker arm. But hopefully I only have to figure out how to do this once, and then the other ones will just go easy. Yeah, right. Okay, it looks like good alignment. The roller onto the valve tip. Let's get our our intake lobe closing. Okay, yeah, it is. It just moved down. Quarter turn-ish. Okay, excellent pattern across the valve tip, and the stud is torqued. This is going together permanently. I'm going to wipe the Sharpie off there for probably no real reason. Still got lube in the pocket there. Zero lash. So I've never done polylocks before, but I did watch Engine Masters, and Steve Brule said that you want to get part of your preload and then run the polylock down and then move both wrenches together for the last little bit. If you try to move the nut and then crank the polylock, it won't lock. You won't get enough on it and it'll come apart. But if you get part of your preload and then run them down together for the rest of the way as one piece, that they hold up better. So I'm going to go like 1/8 of a turn. Then I'm going to run this polylock down. And I'm going to go another 1/8 of a turn. That's the sound of an Allen tip breaking. And we're back with the 7/64 Allen wrench. I'm gonna run the polylock down. Then I'm gonna run both wrenches together the last little bit. Okay, that's gotta stay locked. Trick Flow 80,000 7/150. Scorpion 1.6. Sharpie fine point. Alright, so I want to get to the exhaust opening. Now I got a rocker arm to look at. It should be easy to do. Okay. That looks like exhaust opening. Alright, so I can see the valve tip is to the left, which means this side is to the right, and so that's easy, so I can tap it that way. My brass drift. I might leave the next one not quite this tight. All right, I do have clearance between the rocker arm and the stud shoulder, at least a good like 50 thousandths or so. 4, 5, 6. Picture perfect. Almost perfectly centered on the valve. It's slightly closer to me, closer to the exhaust side, which would mean I could go with a slightly shorter push rod, but I can't because then the rocker arm runs into that hex shoulder on the stud. So I'm absolutely as short as the push rods can be right now, but I mean, that's pretty great. So now the trick is, can I torque that rocker stud without moving the guide plate? But I will go ahead and give myself some fresh witness lines on there with the fine point Sharpie so that I can have the confidence afterwards that it did not move. It did move. But all it did was rotate. I wonder if I can rotate it back even after it's torqued. That's pretty good. I'll give it one more wear pattern test. As perfect. Still got perfect clearance between the rocker arm and the stud. That was just more than quarter turn. I've got good torque on the poly locks. I like it. Look at it. Clearance. Let me show you what kind of clearance I'm getting. So you can see I'm pretty close. This one's actually not that bad. So you can see I'm pretty close to the hex on the rocker stud, but not touching it. I did not put any Sharpie on this one. So it does have a witness mark all the way across, but it's definitely heavier on the right side. So I'm going to see if I can adjust it one way or the other and get it better. It's improved. I'll live with it. So that's my witness Sharpie stripe to make sure nothing moves while I torque the stud. Perfect. All right, that one's going to take just a hair of clearancing. All right, let's see if that helps. Beautiful. All right, clearanced a couple more studs. There. Yeah, you're gonna have to clearance that one too. 20 psi. That's the most oil pressure yet. Well, let's see what kind of wear pattern. Think those all look pretty good. I'll take them. Yeah, this one should already be torqued. Okay, so we do exhaust. All right, we got clearance on every rocker arm to stud. They're all lubed, lashed, and locked. And they all had a good wear pattern on the valve. So half the engine is done. So I ended up having to clearance 4 of those studs to clear the rocker arms. So on this side, instead of putting them together, taking them apart, clearancing them, and putting them back together again, I just went ahead and ground them all the first time. So these valve covers have these nice kind of stiffening trusses across them so that they go on really securely. But the way that this lip is rolled on the bottom of these, it will not pass between the roller rocker trunnions. So I'm going to try to just kind of straighten this out so it's flat, but I may end up just having to trim it. Once it sits down, it seems like it's totally fine, but when you pick it up, it runs into something. Kind of a fresh, clean spot on the side of this breather or PCV baffle. Kind of lines up with where this trunnion would go. Oh, yeah, and the trunnion's all greasy looking. So I think that is hitting here. Probably be okay, but I'm going to see if I can kind of squeeze this thing a little bit. Well, I think I'll go ahead and put the gasket in so it sits at its correct height. Go ahead and bolt it down and then turn the engine with the starter and listen to see if I hear anything contacting. Oh, I almost sprayed oil everywhere. I don't hear or feel any contact, so I think it's all good. So obviously the driver's side valve cover doesn't have any breathers or fill holes or anything like that, but if you ever got them confused, just remember that this one has the special clearance for the alternator. Good. Alright guys, so the LT1 uses this steam pipe. This lets a little bit of coolant always be flowing through the heads so that they can't develop steam pockets. And it goes onto the heads with these banjo bolts. And these banjo bolts have sealing washers, which are kind of metal around the outside and rubber on the inside. And so when the flange of this bolt smashes against the fitting here, it goes down until it gets solid on the metal, and by that time it's compressing the rubber really hard and it seals really well. The problem is these don't seem to exist anymore. There used to be obviously an AC Delco part number to get replacement ones. But since these LT1s are pretty old by now, obviously there's no more factory support, so that part number is discontinued. So I went looking for alternatives, and I saw these listed on Summit. These are Earl's Statoseal, and I measured the bolt. It's a 1/2 inch bolt, so I got the ones, these are -5 AN, which was listed as a 1/2 inch inside diameter. So I said, perfect, 1/2 inch inside diameter, just like this. It's gonna show up, it's gonna look like that. But they're not, they're quite a bit smaller. These are a pretty large outside diameter with a 1/2 inch inside diameter, so it's not the same with these Earl's Statoseals. And actually, the hole that the bolt goes through is about a 5/8, or not about, it's exactly a 5/8 inside diameter hole. So the bolt itself has a bit of wiggle room in there. So then I started looking for a Statoseal or this type of sealing washer with a 5/8 inside diameter. And I'll just make sure to hold it centered as I crank the bolt down, since it's not going to like pilot on the bolt anymore. And so I came up with these. These are a Murray 24338 from O'Reilly's. I believe these are for an air conditioning compressor. They're basically the same thing, metal on the outside, rubber on the inside, but they're the larger diameter, so they should seal between the flange of the bolt and the face of this fitting. They should seal pretty well on there as long as I can hold them centered. And while I was waiting for those, I also found these. These are listed as a Statoseal. They're not an Earl's brand. These came from, it was Pegasus Racing, who I'm not really familiar with. And I don't know if they manufacture these or if they just have a source for them, because there's no manufacturer's name listed on there. But their part number is 3245, steel Statoseal, 5/8 inch. And in this size, it says aluminum is not available. And so I ordered 8 of these as well. So I'm gonna compare these Pegasus ones with these Murray ones and decide which one I think I'll get better sealing from. Pegasus Statoseal on the left and Murray AC compressor seal on the right. The outside diameter of the Murray is slightly smaller. Honestly, I think either one of those would probably work just fine. But I think the Murrays look slightly nicer. All right, the steam pipe is on with those Murray sealing washers. I think I got them evenly spaced all the way around, enough that it'll be evenly compressing that rubber all the way around between the head and the fitting and the bolt. So yeah, good to go. Murray 24338 for all your LT1 steam pipe needs. Well guys, now you see what I've been doing instead of sleeping for the last 6 weeks. Now, if you want to find out if this thing's actually going to run after all that, make sure you're subscribed. All right, thanks a lot. See ya.